Hello everyone, it's Barbara Friesen, grief coach, and today's segment we're going to talk about how do you talk to someone who has recently lost a loved one. We want to avoid some of the platitudes that are common as a response to grief, mostly because they're not very helpful. And so because we live in this kind of death phobic culture, we're really not trained how to respond to people who have just lost a loved one. And we generally feel kind of uncomfortable about the whole thing. And so we resort to these platitudes as a way of trying to make someone feel better, but it actually sometimes has the opposite effect. So here's a couple of hints that I'd just like to share with you. Number one is I think it's important that you don't give people prescriptions about how they can feel better. And a common example that I heard in my own experience is you should really do something nice for yourself. Like, what have you thought about taking a trip somewhere? And even though that's well intentioned, and I understand where that's coming from, people are trying to be helpful, and they're trying to relieve you of your pain as much as possible. The truth is that you don't want to relieve someone of their pain. It's much better to acknowledge the pain that they're in. And if you want to do something helpful, you can ask the person, you know, is there something that I can do? I'd like to be able to help, and then offer something that the person would really be appreciative of, instead of giving them prescriptions. The second hint that I would give is that people will often say, "You're not always going to feel this way. It'll get better." And the truth is that when you're in a lot of pain and you've just lost someone, it's hard to imagine that you're ever going to feel differently than you do right now. And again, people are well intentioned. They don't want to see you in pain. I think it's a lot more helpful, however, to just acknowledge that the person is in pain. And again, you want to offer them something that's actually going to help them. So you could just let them know that you're going to be leaving dinner on their doorsteps this week, or you're going to come over tomorrow and you're going to make them a cup of tea, ask them what time would be good for them, offer to take them for a walk, get them out of the house. Any of these things may seem like small gestures, but they actually mean a lot to a grieving person and are actually quite helpful. The third thing is that I would say is if you haven't seen someone for a while, and you meet them inadvertently, let's say, and they say, "Oh, how are you? I hope you're doing okay." Generally speaking, someone who is in the midst of a grieving process is not doing okay. And because people feel uncomfortable with the pain of grief and acknowledging that pain, there's a tendency to want to reassure oneself that the person actually is okay and they really don't need anything. And if you say, let me know if you need anything, the grieving person is generally speaking not going to respond to that. Partly because it kind of lacks sincerity. And the second part is that oftentimes a grieving person is overwhelmed and they really don't know what they need. So it's much better to show compassion and a genuine caring about the person. And if you do want to offer help, then just do that. Just say, "I'd like to help. What can I do? And would it be okay if I, did this or that? Would it be okay if I dropped by? Would it be okay if we went for a walk?" And you can just offer something of yourself, if you really feel like you want to help. And the fourth thing I would say is that sometimes people will say something to the effect of, I know how you feel when I lost, and they'll go into their story about someone in their life that they lost. And why isn't that helpful? Um, Generally, I would say that it's really hard for another person to relate to your recovered pain. They are too immersed in their own to really acknowledge a loss that you've had. So you want to avoid talking about any losses that you've had and how you've dealt with them, unless the person specifically asks you, because the person who's grieving is not in a position where they can really respond to that. And so, what I would say is probably more helpful is to say, this must be really difficult for you. Sometimes that's all you need to say, and the person will respond. You just want to acknowledge what the person is experiencing. This must be really hard for you. This must be devastating. You must be so upset. Something like that is so much more helpful.